everything he did or that happened on it. He called this his diary. He now had a better way of keeping time than on his tree calendar. He did not need it any more. You have no doubt wondered how Robinson could work in his cave, especially at night, without a light. The truth is, it was a great source of discomfort to him. At sunset he was in total darkness in his cave. During the day, light enough streamed in from the open doorway. To be alone in total darkness is not pleasant. "If I only had fire," he said again and again. He watched the many large beetles and the fireflies flash their light in the dark of the evening as he sat in front of his shelter. The thought came to him that if he only had some way of keeping together a number of them, they would serve very well for a candle in his cave at night. How he longed for a glass bottle, such as he had so often wantonly broken when at home. Back of his shelter there was a hill where the rock layers jutted out. He had noticed here several times a thin, transparent rock that he had seen in his father's store. It is called isinglass. "I will make a living lantern," he said aloud in his eagerness. He soon had a suitable piece pried loose. He cut a part of a cocoanut shell away, and in its place he put a sheet of isinglass. That evening at dark he gathered several handfuls of the great fire beetles and put them in his lantern. What joy their glow gave him in his cave at night! It was almost as much comfort as a companion, but while it lighted up the deep dark of the cave and enabled him to move about, he was unable after all to write in his diary at night. Every morning he set his captives free. In the evening he would go out and capture his light. Chapter 22. Robinson's Diary. Chapter 23. Robinson is sick. One evening Robinson went to bed sound and well. The next morning he was sick. Before he had only the heat of the day to complain of. Today he was freezing. He wanted to go to work to get warm, but even this did not break his chill. It increased till his teeth chattered with the cold. "Perhaps," thought he, "if I can sleep a little I will get better." But he could not sleep. He was burning with fever and then shaking with cold by turns. He felt a strong thirst, but he was so weak that he could scarcely get the goat's milk. He had no sooner drunk the milk than his tongue was as dry as before. He felt better after a night of sleep, but the next day his fever and chills were worse than before. Then he bethought him of his parents. How kindly his mother had taken care of him! Now no one was near that could assist him. "Ah," he sighed, "must I die here? Who would bury me? There is no one to miss me." At this the tears came to his eyes. His sickness increased with each day. Occasionally the fever would go down sufficiently to allow him to get something to eat. Then it would be worse than before. In his dire need he wanted to pray, but he was so weak that he could only stammer, "Dear God, help me, or I shall die." One night he had a strange dream. He thought he saw his good old father standing before him and calling to him. He spread out his arms and cried aloud, "Here I am! Here I am!" He tried to get up, but he was so weak that he fell back fainting. He lay there a long time, but finally came to. He felt a burning thirst, but no one reached him a drop of water. He prepared to die. He folded his hands and prayed to God that he would be merciful to him. He prayed forgiveness from his parents. Once more he raised his head and gazed wildly about, then sank back and knew no more. When he again awoke he felt better. His hot fever had gone. He attempted to walk. He had just enough strength to crawl to the table and fetch a shell of water. When he tried to walk he had to sit down at every 2 or 3 steps. From this he recovered gradually, growing better and better, and he thanked God inwardly for his recovery. His sickness had continued from June 18th to July 3rd. End of chapter 23. Robinson is sick. Chapter 24. Robinson's Bower. Robinson's sickness set him thinking about his home. He had been so afraid of animals when he came to the island that he thought of nothing but protection from them. He had been now a year on the island, and had seen nothing more dangerous than a goat. The fear of animals had practically faded away. In thinking over his sickness, he made up his mind that it was caused by sleeping in his cave where the sun never shone. The ventilation seemed good, but the walls were damp, especially in the rainy season. Then the water would trickle down through the cleft in spite of all he could do. He resolved to build, if possible, a little cottage, or as he called it, a bower, in the yard in front of his shelter. The hedge of thistles was growing and formed a fence that an animal could not get through. His screen of willows on the outside of this would soon hide him from view of the sea. He had the wall of rock and the hill behind him. He planned out his way of building it very carefully. "It must be done," he said. Robinson formed the habit of talking to himself so that he would not forget how to talk. "Without hammer, nails, or saw." He first sought out 4 posts as large as he could well handle. There were always broken trees and branches in the forest. If he searched long enough he could find posts that suited to his need. He wanted 4 of the same thickness and height, and with a fork at the end. After long searching he found what he wanted. He was careful to get those that he could drag to his shelter. He placed these in the ground, forming the corners of a square about 10 feet long. In the forks he placed poles running around about 8 feet from the ground. At about every 3 feet he fastened others, running in the same way, with heavy cords made of fiber. He found his greatest trouble with the roof. It must be sloped to shed rain. He had to find 2 more forked posts, 3 or 4 feet longer than the others. These he placed opposite each other in the centers of 2 sides. Upon these he placed a ridge pole. He then laid other poles lengthwise from ridge pole to the edge of the frames. His frame was now done. His plan was now to cover this frame with straw or grasses tied in bundles. He had seen the barns in the country thatched in this way by the Dutch farmers in New York State. He gathered the straw of the wild rice. It was long, straight, and tough. It was easily tied into flat bundles. These he bound securely onto the framework with cords. He began at the bottom so that the ends of the row would lap over the tops of the last one put on. In this way he built a very comfortable and rain-proof bower. It was easy to make a bed of poles covered with straw. A table and bench were added and shelves of poles. Robinson felt great joy over this new home. "I will not now be sick any more," he said. "In case of danger I can get into my cave, but at all other times I will live in my bower." He had use still for his cave. He could use it to store some things in, but he had to be careful about the dampness in wet weather. Robinson was getting to feel at home. He was no longer sad. He did not grieve so much for home. He looked upon his home with great delight. It was secure. He had his herd of goats always in his sight. At evening he would do his milking. He found he could keep the milk for some time in the cave. He was tempted to try making some butter from the rich, good cream. "But," said Robinson, "I have neither vessels to make it in, nor bread to eat it on." He planned many things to do. "I will make a hammock some day for my bower, and some vessels to use in my work," he thought. End of chapter 24. Robinson's Bower. End of chapters 20 through 24 of An American Robinson Crusoe.